a little bit about going wrong the right way. So this is specifically around building products at the companies that were just mentioned. So I should say, Expensify, Uber, Fat Lama. Just before I left work, the CEO did say to me, like, if you don't hire anyone from this event, you're not doing another one. So here's the sell. You heard a little bit of it there, but yeah, it's a insured peer-to-peer rental marketplace where you can list any items or buy any items. We are hiring lots of people, engineers, designers, PMs, operations, engineering managers, data scientists. If you're any of those things or something else and you're interested, come and talk to us. That's enough about that for now. Cool. So I want to talk about building great products, and I think that it's quite important to first of all talk about building a great team, because without a great team, like, you may as well forget the product entirely. I don't want to spend too long talking about this, but I think it's important to get that there. So the first thing that I found from these companies is that you need to empower your employees to make decisions, right? This means like giving everyone data, giving everyone the data to make the right decisions for the product. Give people access to the data. Don't lock down data because you're scared that people are going to misuse it, right? Anything from people working like customer support and operations all the way through to engineering and any other functions throughout the business. Like, give them access to the data, let them see it, let them be smart about it, make some interesting discoveries and decisions. I think it's very important. You'll find that like a lot of good product insights come out of that data. Second thing is fostering responsibility. Like, you've given everyone access to everything, you need to make sure that they understand how to use it responsibly. And this means everything from setting expectations and having a blameless culture for when things go wrong. Like, if you can't let people go wrong, then you're never going to move forward. People are scared to do things. Let builders build. This is cribbed directly from Uber's cultural values, or the old ones. Basically saying, like, if someone has a good idea, like, let them do it. Get out of the way as much as you can, and let them do their thing. And then the last one is be cross-functional. So I've seen smaller companies transition into bigger ones and not have a cross-functional setup in their teams. So they have, like, a mobile team and a web team and a back-end team and a front-end team and a QA and all these other teams. And that works. You get to a certain point where you'll find that you can be much more focused on a product if you have cross-functional teams. So that means you say, we'll divide the teams up along the lines of the business. So for Fat Lama, that might be something like a lender's team and a borrower's team, and you give each of them their own mission and their own metrics, and they have to work on their own product and their goals, and you put on each one of that a designer, a front-end engineer, back-end engineer, mobile, whatever the team needs, support people, sales people, operations, and you put them all together and you say, that's your mission, and then they can go ahead and like build that product in a much better way than having to wait for another team to deliver on something because they were blocked, right? Okay, so I think it's important to, if you want to build a great product, to understand the trade-offs when building a product. This is the classic phrase: a good, cheap, fast, pick two. Like, you can't have it all, and you have to pick. You can either do good and fast, cheap, fast, whatever. And I think that the ignorance to these trade-offs will hurt your product in the long run. Okay, so like some examples of like common fallacies that you see when like talking about or building products. It's like, yeah, we'll come back and tackle the tech debt later. It's like, sure you will. Okay, it's never going to happen. So be aware when people say that, you can't just gloss over it. Can't we just add a, and then toggle, button, filter, whatever, right? As soon as you hear, can't we just, warning signs like going off in your head, right? Can't we just is just a horrible phrase for products. Like, everything has an implication, and you need to be aware of that. You have to think about the trade-offs you're making. Just by adding a button might seem simple, but it might add like a whole bunch of complexity down the line. Oh, we'll just put more resources on it. It's a classic one. Like, if you heard about the mythical man month, like, you have one person working for 1 week on something. If you add 2 people, it's not going to take half a week. It's going to take a little bit longer. We'll build that in V2. Sure you will. Just like you'll get rid of the tech debt. Never happens. And cheap, well, we'll just hire an intern, it'll be great. No, I mean, interns are cool, but you'll end up in probably a worse place if that's all you do. So you have to understand the trade-offs. And when you do understand the trade-offs, you realize that there is no panacea to everything. Like, you can't always get it right, and you will go wrong. Like, I don't know if that's a revelation to anyone. It certainly was to me at the start of my career. Like, You will go wrong in building products and making the decisions, but that's okay. You just have to try and go wrong the right way. And I spent a bit of time thinking about like what does that actually mean. I thought it's best to start off with thinking about like what is going wrong the wrong way. So I think that building things on a whim that you have to support forever, this is a disaster. It's so easy to do something that it's hard to undo. So an example of this might be, let's say like, oh, we want to get some other businesses to use our stuff. Let's build an API for them to use. And you just build this API and think, this is cool, I will build this API. All of a sudden, like you have people that depend on that. They've made stuff around their business that depends on your thing working. You have to support that forevermore or upset a lot of people. Okay. Another one is like, oh, this is cool, we should just build an app, right? And once you build an app, you can't take that back off people's phones, right? You can't make them uninstall the app, and which means that either you have to make that app work forever, or when they open it, it's going to be broken and you're going to look like an idiot. So some things like don't make like decisions that you're going to have to support forever. Similarly, locking yourself into architectural decisions. This is a little bit more on the engineering side, but if you build all of your infrastructure around a single provider or service like AWS or something, and use all of those things, like be aware that you're locking yourself into that pretty much, and you're probably never going to get out of it, or it's going to cost you a lot of time and money. Building things that are hard to remove. You're thinking about the product and you think, oh, we could add this feature. It ends up impacting, the billing, support, the user experience across like the mobile and the website and all these other things. Sometimes it's inevitable, but be very aware that if you have a feature that cuts across all these different concerns, like removing that is going to be very, very difficult. And building things that are hard to build on top of. I think this is one that people don't often see a lot, but if you are trying to build like a prototype for something, right? You might say, oh, it's just a prototype, we'll just bang some code together, push it out, see what happens, it's going to be fine. And then you go, oh, cool, it worked. Now what? Do you go back and write tests for all the code that you just written? No one ever does that, right? So building stuff to be forward facing, to like maintain, it's not going to be hard to build on top of, I think is key. So going around the right way, okay, being experiment driven. I think that this is stuff that like people talk about all the time. We're a data-driven company. It's very difficult to actually do in reality, but it is, a very good way to build products if you can. So I think it's really important to have a hypothesis or have some goal metrics. Like if you just build a product and you don't say what the success is for that product, like how do you know if it's working? Right? You have to define what this thing should do and how it should be used for it to be a success. And you might think that it's fine not to do that because, well, if a few people use it, maybe it's good enough. But the key to like building a really tight product is to be able to kill stuff as well. Building enough to test that hypothesis or to test those metrics, right? So this goes into the sort of debate around should you build an MVP or should you build an MLP? So that's minimum viable product versus minimum lovable product. The thinking around that is like, you might build a minimum viable product that's the least that you need for this thing to work, right? And then you set your metrics of the goal as, we think this is going to improve conversion by 50%. We build this product, and you do it as fast as you can in an MVP, we'll just test it and see if it works. And then no one uses it. And you think, well, that didn't work. Can it? Well, the problem might be that maybe it doesn't work because you didn't actually spend enough time making the experience good, but the product idea was great. So if you build a minimum lovable product, the idea is it's still a small scope, but it's enough to test your hypothesis correctly. And sometimes that's going to take a little bit more time, but it's probably going to be worth it. And the third thing I think is to not get attached to products. This is so easily done. I do it myself all the time. If you're an engineer or designer or anyone that's working on building a product from the UX side, anything, you put all of your effort into building something. You spend weeks working on it. You launch it to the public, and no one uses it. You think, oh, what if we just tweak this thing? What if we just do this? And then you end up in this cycle where you just keep going and going and going and trying to build something to get it to work because you love that feature or you spent so much time on it, when in reality, probably you just want to bin it, right? So that's a very, very difficult thing to do. It's very hard to let go of something you just spent the last month building. But if you want to make the product like really, really tight, I think that's important. So I want to tell you how can we do this, right? And this is really looking at my experiences at those 3 companies over the last whatever years, and figuring out where did I go wrong, where did we go wrong as teams, and seeing if we can like think about how to avoid those problems. So the first one is plan. Sounds stupid, but it's true. Some people think like time spent planning is wasted. This could be anything from like, oh, we have a bunch of engineers, why aren't they coding something? That's their job, they're engineers, they should code, right? For engineers, if you spend 100% of your time coding, like you're going to do stuff wrong, like pretty drastically. So, just take some time to plan. There's a bit of a law of diminishing returns in the sense that, planning forever is not going to get you much more than planning for a little bit. But do it enough. It might just be a couple of hours on a 100-hour project, but it's not time wasted. What I see a lot is people figuring out like we want to build an MVP, want to move really quickly, like we're agile, we're a startup, blah blah blah, and you just think like, how do we build the MVP? And really, what I think that you should do to make sure that you're building things the right way is to plan the whole feature. Like imagine what the best implementation of this feature could possibly be, plan out how that would work, and then cut back the scope so that you can come to that MVP or the MLP. And I think that it's like a bit of a subtle distinction, but I see it happen all the time. I think it's very, very important to do that. And that's how you get that like lovable product, really. If you do an MVP, you might end up with like buttons all over the place just because it works, but cutting back the scope of a feature to make the core of it great is really key. And then decide on, this sounds stupid again, but decide on the success criteria before you launch this. Because then it's so easy not to do this. You just say we'll launch it, we'll see what happens. But then how do you know if it's a success or not? So that's on planning. I think that an example of where I think we got this wrong in my career was building out. I worked at Uber. I spent a few years working on the Uber for Business team, and at the start of that project, it was just like the CEO and whoever come up to us and say like, right, you 5 get in a room. We want to like build something for businesses. Like, go figure it out. So we sat in a room. We were like deciding what we were going to do. We realized we had no sales team, no support, no operations. Like none of this stuff. It's just basically 5 engineers. And actually, we had a designer and a PM, and we had to figure out what we were going to build. So we thought we don't have any of these other things to support us. We have to build something that's very easy for people to onboard, right? We need to build something where it's all self-service and they don't have to like contact support or sales. So we ended up building like a product that works very, very well for small companies. If you're a small company, you can onboard easily. We thought big companies, that's going to be like a sales cycle of a year to sign them. They want a contract, they want all these bells and whistles of features, and we don't want to deal with any of that crap. So we want to build just this thing that's easy to onboard. So we built that, and then it worked. And then the big companies came to us anyway, and they said, well, now we want to use this. And we had salespeople, and they're like, we want to sign the big companies, because that's where all the money is. And we're like, that's cool. And then we got to the point where we had built the product centered around small teams, and now we needed to fit the big teams into it. And at the start, we built it, and we didn't build like a feature that let people group their employees into different buckets and give them different rules or experiences in the product. And we definitely thought about it when we started. We thought, maybe we should build groups. People are going to want that when they're bigger. And I said, we're not focusing on big stuff now. Forget that. We'll tackle that later. It's going to be fine. We didn't plan out the whole feature, like how the whole thing should work. And we built the system so it didn't support groups. Fast forward 2 years, we still hadn't built groups because it was so difficult to put back into the system because everything was centered around like one group of employees in the system. It took us so long to get around to building this, and that was a real big key feature to unlocking these like massive enterprise companies, right? You want to sign Goldman Sachs on Uber for Business, like you need groups because they don't want to manage 50,000 employees in one, same organization. So that's a time when just a little bit more like foresight into what we were eventually going to become could have helped us. It probably would have taken an extra week to build the initial version to support the groups, but that's a hell of a lot better than a couple of months of work of a whole team to get groups into it in the future. Maybe, I don't know. Life is a bit of a, n=1 experiment. Like you can't go back and see what would have happened. Like maybe the product would have died, but my gut's telling me like we probably should have built that from the start. Okay, go backwards. So experiment quickly and kill ruthlessly. Like this is one of, I said it's so difficult to do, especially because you get attached to stuff, but it really does let you have a much more focused product. If you can just kill features that don't work instead of leaving them hanging around, you're going to be in a much better state. Excuse me. And, people sometimes think of a negative experiment as being a failure, like an experiment with a negative outcome. If you're doing an experiment and you say, like, let's see if this improves the conversion, you try it and it doesn't, that's not a failure. You've just learned that doesn't work, which is great. The people who take this to an absolute extreme are Google X. I don't know if you've ever seen a presentation. There's a really good, I think it's a TED Talk by Astro Teller, is a guy who runs the X division at Google and Alphabet. And it's a very interesting presentation. In it, he basically says that they try as hard as they can to kill a project. And they try this. How many ways can we kill this? How can it not work? And they do all of this, and if it still works at the end of it, then they know it's probably a good idea. And if they do manage to kill it, then they celebrate. They have a party, everyone gets a bonus or a promotion or whatever, and they all celebrate that they've killed an idea, which is so backwards to the normal way people work, but it's brilliant in enforcing the fact that a negative outcome for an experiment is not a failure. Like you've learned something, you've saved yourself a bunch of time building a product that you don't need because it doesn't work. And then, people care, but not as much as you think. I suppose this is a little bit of my opinion. I've just been speaking to people who are doing user research, and I don't know, maybe they think differently, but I found that like people really care about your product, but not as much as you do. Like every day you're building your website or doing research or talking to customers for your specific product, and that you live and breathe that product. And your users might come along like once a month. Right? And they're not going to notice that when you shift the button 5 pixels to the right, something's different, and that might be the biggest thing that you're caring about right now, and they're like, whatever, I just want to buy this thing. So people care, and you can go backwards, and don't be afraid to stick to your vision. If you have a vision for how something should work, like don't be upset. Like if you get the user that does care, and they say, oh, you moved the button 5 pixels to the right, and now it looks bad. And you're like, well, this is how we want it to be. And it's again like from my own experience, at Expensify this happened basically. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Expensify. It's like an online expense reporting system, and in it we had so many ways to do the same thing. So just the example of let's say adding an expense to a report, right? You could either go onto your expenses page and click a bunch of them and say like add this to a report. Or you go into the report and like import expenses to it. Or you go onto an individual expense and select the report you wanted to add it to. You do all this thing from all these different ways. And what that meant was every user sort of did something their own way, and that was like the way that they did it. And when we had the focus, like the vision of like we just want people to be able to like be in a report and import expenses, so we took away the other button and people went absolutely bonkers. Like, you took away this button, now I can't add the expense. Oh, you can, you just go to the report and you add it from there. I don't want to do that, I want to add it the other way. Okay. And the mistake we made is we went back on ourselves. We said, oh, we're really sorry. We don't want to upset you, we'll put the button back. And I was like, how can we ever build like a really tight product if every time somebody gets upset, we don't stick to our guns, we don't stick to our vision for the product, and we go back on ourselves. So that's the thing where we went wrong there. Okay, have a North Star. So this sort of ties into what I was just saying, like know where you want your product to be. Like have a roadmap, have an idea of what it is that you're trying to achieve. Very important to do. And then watch out for feature creep, like especially quick fixes. So feature creep, if you're not familiar with the term, just means like you start to build one thing, and all of a sudden you need this thing to make that one work. Then you need one more thing, and you end up with just this giant mess of features that don't really like work together because you just added, and iterated. And it's very difficult to avoid because you want to move fast, you want to try lots of different things, you want to add things, see how they work. But if you don't kill things, you end up in this situation. You have all these features, you have 9 different ways to add an expense to a report or whatever it is, and you end up in a mess. And yeah, be wary for like quick fixes because, you know, an example is at Fat Lama we have like this live search feature, and you can see what people are searching for, and you can like fulfill that demand, or you can like learn about the marketplace. And we think, okay, now we just launched New York, and the live search is showing stuff for people in London, for, you know, showing like items in London for people in New York. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like no one's going to rent a camera across the Atlantic. So, well, what if we just add like a little toggle, you know, that switches like between the UK and the US? And you're like, hold on a minute, like, okay, we could build that, but if we do that, like, how is that going to scale out to all the other countries? Like, do you need to be able to filter this thing? And all of a sudden, the product that's so simple, like look what people are searching for, becomes this like crazy mess of you want to filter this thing and search between like locations and like toggle these different things on and off, and you end up in this like you've just built this like big mess of stuff that defeats the whole point, the whole purpose of, you know, what you wanted to build in the first place. This North Star of look what people are searching for, and then make sure you're measuring the right thing as well. Like this. Again, it's like maybe a little subtle, but I think like it's very important to measure the right thing. An example that I was just thinking of actually on the way over here was a little bit out of left field, but supermarkets, right? If you go to a supermarket, it started off with like someone at a till, at the checkout, and they're like going through items as fast as they can. And you might think, okay, how do we like iterate on this? Like, they are doing, you know, they can do 27 items per minute through the checkout or whatever. Okay, that's a good metric. Like, how many items per minute can they get through the checkout? And you say, like, how can we optimize that? And they're like, right, now let's build in like an automatic barcode scanner, and now you can get through like 50 in a minute, and they don't have to type in the product or the price. And then you add like scales, and you can get through like 60 a minute. And then someone comes along and says, well, we can sort of do way better than that. We can build like self-checkouts. And now, instead of having only 4 in there, we can put 12 in there, and we can get through a lot more like items scanned per minute overall from people, you know, doing it themselves. You think, oh, that's a great improvement. And then you get Amazon coming along and saying, hold on a minute, why are we measuring items per minute through the checkout? Why aren't we measuring how long people take to leave the shop? And they just said, let's just get rid of checkouts. Let's build the technology so people can just walk out the shop and it'd be automatically checked out. Right? So that's like the Amazon Go technology, right? So if you're measuring the wrong thing, if you're too tightly focused on like measuring very specific things, like items per minute or whatever it might be in your products, you might miss the forest for the trees. Right? You might not think, actually, what are we trying to measure here overall? So I think that's one that is like very, very common, and people do. And I think that is pretty much all I have for you, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.